Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Lindsay Lerner, and you're listening to The Cost of the Status Quo. More people than ever are questioning why they do what they do and forging their own path. And on this show, I sit down with these entrepreneurs, trailblazers, creatives, and overall awesome beings to discuss the ideas, the opportunities, and the overall tips and tricks they're using so that the rest of us can do the same. This is The Cost of the Status Quo. Hey, welcome to another episode of Cost of the Status Quo, where we discuss the challenges and rewards of navigating today's rapidly changing world. On today's show, we are joined by Linda Camacho, a literary agent, among other things. Linda has a unique perspective on the world of publishing, as she has worked in various roles within the industry, from editing to marketing and now as an agent. Linda shares with us the exciting but often challenging day-to-day operations of her job, including handling client submissions, editing manuscripts, and navigating the complexities of contract negotiation. She also shares with us the current state of diversity in publishing and what she would like to see in the future. Join us now as we dive into the cost of the status quo with Linda Camacho.
You say you don't know, and I say please don't.
So I grew up in the Bronx, pretty far up north, that I was basically at the end of the 2 train. So I loved being there, though it was always a nuisance to, get around, to the city and all that stuff, just because nobody at the time lived in the Bronx. Like I felt like whenever I went to high school, which was on the Upper East Side, I felt like I had to do the trek alone. But I really loved where I grew up.
Awesome. And growing up in the Bronx, did you have any idea of, this vision of what you wanted to be when you grew up that, most kids get forced into?
No, it was funny too, right? I was among the first in the family to eventually go to college. So college was the thing, right? You're going to go to college and my parents sacrificed so much, but there was never a directive as to what to do. I thought I was going to be very practical and do something like I kept saying, well, maybe business and law, something that was business law, which, is not quite a thing. I mean, sort of, but not really. I just knew I wanted to make money, which is kind of laughable given what I do now. But yeah, even all the way through college, I truly was really, really thinking about it. It's not like I waited till I was going to graduate to go. I really had no clue. I became an expert, though, at figuring out how to apply to every grad school program that I never actually applied to. Law school, PhD, MBA, like I became the go-to person for that.
Where do you think that pressure for financial success came from? You mentioned your parents, sacrificed a lot in order to get you into the position to be able to go to college. Was that motivated by that?
I think that was part of it. I think, my dad, they grew up in the Bronx too, in the South Bronx, Puerto Ricans, South Bronx. And education wasn't a thing that was super discussed. It was just, okay, you're going to graduate from high school and get a job and, make a decent living. So my dad worked in retail for basically his whole career. And my mom, interestingly, she started out as a teller in a bank and she worked her way up to like assistant vice president. And she was the moneymaker after a point, which was interesting. And she learned a lot from, because it's funny, like, the Bronx can be, and this can be any place, but at least for where they are from, it was very insular, right? So they didn't really, speaking for themselves, get to know too many people outside of that. So my dad kind of remained in the Bronx working for much of his life, at least, when he was still working retail. And my mom went to the city to work. And then she was like, my God, like all these experiences and all of these people, I want you to be able to talk to all kinds of people. And she also recalls an experience where she and my dad went to some function. I think I forgot what it was, some small thing. And people were they were trying to do icebreakers and people were saying, oh yeah, I've been to Italy. And they had never been to any of the places and they felt kind of embarrassed. And they just said, we don't want you to feel that way. So again, not a lot of it was driven by, I guess it was never explicitly stated that you would need money, but it was kind of implied if you're going to travel, college is expensive. But yeah, I just thought of it as something where I wanted to, yes, succeed in that way, right? Be deemed a success and make a ton of money, whatever that looked like. And take care of the family too. Not that they ever put that pressure at either. I don't know. It just, that's what you did. You would become a lawyer, or I thought maybe lawyer would have been the easy, whatever easy means, would have been the easy way. Cause I just knew med school was not going to be for me at all. And of course I didn't do law school, but.
Yeah. I mean, it's just interesting thinking about that and the systems that exist and that we get funneled into and not pushed, but pushed into. I mean, it was the same thing for me. It was like, yeah, this is the assumption. Like you are or not even assumption, like you are going to go to college. That's the end of the conversation. And like you said, it didn't matter what you went for. It's just like, you're going to go and you're going to do this thing. And it's definitely interesting. And it's also interesting to think about the different definitions of success and what that even is, because your definition of success could be wildly different to what your folks wanted you to do, or other family members, friends, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Yeah. My gosh.
Where did you end up going to college? Were you also in New York?
New York. For the longest time, I was obsessed with California. I never made it out there. I remember applying to, I think, UCLA, Berkeley. They said, no, thank you. No, thank you, ma'am. So I didn't settle for my school at all. It's just my vision was to go away because I grew up really sheltered. So no, I actually did stay in New York, but the goal was not to live at home. And thankfully, my parents were able to afford me to stay on campus. So I went to Cornell, which I adored. It wasn't California, but it was a weird obsession with California. But no, I adored Cornell. It was wonderful. And I got in, and then I remember visiting after the fact, when I was deciding between a few. And my dream was like, when you go watch TV, because no one in my family had gone to college. I think one had, but it was still, I think it was a CUNY close to home, right? Affordability. No one had gone onto a campus. So it was beautiful. And I was like, this is the place. This is it. This is
Totally.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, very like stereotypical experience.
Oh, I
like,
wanted that. I mean,
this is how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. And so you're at Cornell, like you definitely didn't, there was a high bar where you went. So that's fantastic. And what were you into when you were there? Were you just exploring? Like you said, I mean, there's so many different things that you were interested in.
Yeah. I started out because they have 7 colleges under their umbrella. So I started in the arts and sciences school. So I just took the most liberal artsy stuff, especially my first year. I think I took art, like history of modern art. I took Italian. You had to take a writing class. I took it about, I think it was called like sex and chivalry in the Middle Ages. It was so like fun. Like I'm sure I took some practical stuff and it all fulfilled requirements. I was very aware of that. But then I think in the middle of my first year, I realized, I think I'd like to study communications. And we had a program. So I transferred colleges within Cornell, which actually wound up being cheaper. So that was good because it was like considered the state land grant school. I'm like, cool, I will take a cheaper thing. But it wound up, and I liked what I wound up studying, but they kind of fooled me because I thought it was going to be communications, which is what you would think. No, it's communication, which that's a difference. It wound up being, I had to get a Bachelor of Science. It was a social science, but I had to take all these science stuff. I think the closest I got was like writing for magazines, which I think they phased out. They're like, no, this isn't serious, whatever that means. They became very serious about the sciences. So it was more social psychology in the end, which was still interesting. Not what I thought, but hey, I wasn't about to change my mind. I was straight on. I was like, you got to graduate. Let's go. So.
Right. And at that point, was there any motivator of like, yeah, if this is something that I'm like into, I want to do something with this? Or was there just a fixation of like, this degree needs to be over?
I think it was a combination. I did like it. I did enjoy it. I think there was one that was like, I think Psych 101 about sleep, learning about attachment theory. I think I took like a class on attachment and human bonding, which is truly fascinating.
Okay. We could all use a few,
right?
Of those classes.
I think I took like psychology and TV and like advertising, and it was really interesting. I didn't love doing like the papers where you had to do scientific experimentation, blah. not for me, but I made it through. I'm so happy I did. But yeah, no, I liked it. I still didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I was getting closer, whatever that meant. Yeah, I wasn't going away. I was, because I looked at practical things, which just didn't appeal, sadly.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, that is what we're here to talk about. So
Yeah. Would have been easier, I
tracks.
guess, in certain ways.
Totally. Was there any specific inspiration that led you to pursuing this career in publishing?
One of my friends in college, I found out only a few years of knowing her that her mom was this best-selling romance writer that I was a fan of. I'm like, oh my God, that's your mom? That's so cool. So it was strange a little bit, but it was fascinating because I had never met anybody associated with books or again, like most people in publishing, was a big reader. Very much a reader, even in the cafeteria, just reading in the corner sort of thing. But I didn't think about that as a career because I didn't know that existed as a career, right? You don't really connect books to the career. So then she mentioned at one point, oh, like there's this, you could get an internship at like a book publishing thing. And she recommended. But interestingly, I sort of looked at him like, this seems really cool, but I don't know. I don't know why I hesitated. And then my first internship, which was a bit later in the game, I think it was a junior in college, wound up being, again, networking. My mom knew this person whose daughter had also graduated from Cornell, also a person of color. And we just hit it off so well. And she was working at MTV. So I was like, oh, that could be cool. So I wound up doing like a development internship. And that kind of set me on the path to books, interestingly. Yeah.
And so you've got this internship. And then was there any specific moment where like a job opened up or what happened post that?
So for development, it was for Noggin in the End. And that was where I discovered Degrassi. And it was kind of fun. You had to kind of sit there and watch Degrassi. I don't remember why I was watching it, but it was fun. There were some things I didn't understand, like some things, like some super like kid stuff, and that were younger than like, this is a bestseller. Okay, cool. I don't get that, but that's great. So we had to read a lot of scripts that came in. And then I was going, okay, I like this. I think this is really cool. And then it kind of, for some reason, made me think about publishing again. I'm like, I enjoy this part, the development of that. And I could do TV, but I wasn't sure. So I went back to school after that for my senior year, and people kept in touch. They said, hey, if something opens up. And then my mom networked for me again. Another person of color that she was friends with at the bank that she worked with, they all know each other. It's a small community in that sense. So her daughter had graduated from Cornell like a decade before me, and she happened to be on campus, and we became really good friends. Such a great person. And I think I had, kind of talked her ear off about not knowing what I wanted to do. That on on her 10th visit to see me, she's like, hey, you do like books from what I remember. I said, I do like books. And she said, well, and she worked at HR at like Goldman Sachs or something. No, Morgan Stanley, one of those. She knew that's not what I would have wanted, but she said, I was on this panel, and it was a diversity recruitment panel, and someone sitting next to me was recruiting for Penguin to work at Penguin. And why don't you? So she gave me the contact info, and that's kind of what started that.
Okay. And so did you finally historically, mom was doing a lot of the networking. You finally like broke in and you were like, this is my chance.
Yeah. I reached out to the recruiter who was super lovely. And like most people, I thought about editorial. Most people think of publishing and editors. I'm like, oh yeah, I want to be an editor. Sure. And there was some editorial assistant job. I applied for that. She wanted to bring me in, but then the day before the interview, she called and she's like, I'm sorry, Linda, it was taken internally, which is a very common thing. But I was like, no. She said, but we have this other job. And it was reprint production, very back end. I didn't even know what it was. She's like, it's in reprints. Are you interested? I said, yes, I am. I did not know. And she knew I didn't know. But so she put me in for the job. And then I still remember going in for that. And this was 2005, going in for that interview. And just coincident, and like so many women have helped me in general, just women, uplifting women. I feel very lucky. Honestly, that's taught me how to be as well. But I remember going for the interview and totally random, but the supervisor, super young, she was like 27. She was Puerto Rican from the Bronx too, just totally coincidental. And we hit it off. Like we hit it off. And I had done my homework. Like I'd memorized like imprints and business stuff. So I didn't want to go in there and just go, I like books, because lots of people do. so so I remember she got excited, but you don't really know. But she was like, "Oh, hold on." So then she pulled me into a meeting with her like VP. And I remember the VP being very nice, very tough and kind of scary, asking, she's like, "Oh, so how many job interviews have you been on?" I'm like, just this one." She's like, "Well, you're very lucky." And I didn't know what that meant. But on the way home, I got the job offer, which was amazing for a pittance. But I was very excited to get that job.
Okay, so you start out at Penguin, and then if you're not to gloss over it, but to fast forward a little bit into now as a literary agent, what does a typical day look like now with, I'm sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, you definitely having had all these various roles, back end all the way through. Does that give you now a different perspective and sense of empathy towards the work and the writers that you're working with as well?
Oh yeah, it really does. Because even from being back end, even when I eventually moved to the job before agenting, which was Random House on the marketing side, and that was children's books. I started on the adult side, and then I did children's. I had to do with such nitty gritty, completely unglamorous stuff. Like even something as simple as like the information that you see in summaries on Amazon.com. Like I had to help smooth the way to get that out. So it helps me as an agent. Oh, even I also got my MFA, which they helped pay for. That was fun. I was just like, I wanted to get a degree, and I thought it was going to be more practical, but at least I knew going in, I wanted to get better I knew what I wanted. I knew eventually I wanted to be an agent. I'm like, well, I could meet people and get better at critiquing and all that stuff. But yeah, working with clients, it really does help having that kind of like 360 view with even something like if they're going, "Oh my God, in Goodreads, it says this thing, but that's incorrect." I'm not going to freak out. I know who to and agents knew how to reach out to, but I still remember when I worked on the other side, if an agent didn't understand that, they would freak out, right? Just because they're like, "Oh my God, what this?" But I'm like, "Oh, that's what that is." Well, the feed is going to come through on Sunday. Like I knew just all the nitty gritty to help soothe my clients. I'm like, "It's okay. We'll get it fixed. It's fine." Yeah.
That's awesome. And it's just interesting to hear, your perspective as a college student and not, being nervous about networking and getting your foot in the door. And now, I mean, that's the entire job of an agent.
Yeah, when I was super hungry for a job, it was hard years ago at first to do it. But then when you're really desperate, you lose shame. And I got really good at just reaching out to everybody. And some people responded. So it's not a problem for me anymore.
Totally. I love it. And so now what does a typical day look like as a literary agent?
Oh, and I think like with most people, they say this too. It really varies. But of course, first thing I do is check emails, make sure there are no fires to put out, which there's always something, keeps me on my toes. Always checking emails. Sometimes it's chasing down payments for clients. Sometimes it's, of course, negotiating contracts, and that can be such a long game as well. Giving edit notes to a client on their manuscript, or sometimes if I'm really lucky, I can call a client with news of a deal, an offer for a book. Yeah, that's always the most fun part. Talking with my agency about various subsidiary rights, like, with the film TV co-agents, the foreign rights team. Sometimes those deals come through. It's like, "Oh, we have an offer for the French edition of this book." And that's always wonderful too. And then constantly talking to editors, and sometimes the editors and the teams of market, like constantly talking to people all day long, which to me in the past would have sounded like a nightmare, but I really enjoy it. Like I feel it at the end of the day, and I do you collapse and just like I can't do anything after that. But I really enjoy. And then, of course, and I'm so bad at it. I'm closed at the moment to queries, but I want to open within the next few months to submissions. But I am trying to keep up with them because it's a privilege to get them, but sifting through them can be a bear. So
I'm sure.
because there's so many good
Yeah,
ones. There's so many.
It's so intense.
How do you make a decision? That's always the tricky thing.
Right. Do you have any set of criteria for that, or is it more of I'm sure, it's more of a nuanced, perhaps gut feeling to a lot of these things?
It's that mixture of, yes, of course, I pay attention to trends, but it really mostly is a gut feeling. More than that, because there have been things that I have offered on, and I represent a little bit of a lot of things. Like I do picture books, middle grade, white, young adult, and some adult, like horror and romance and stuff like that. But it really has to be a gut feeling because I've definitely looked at a thing, and then when I've made an offer to a client, I'll sometimes go, okay, I think this is going to be a hard sell. Like I'm not going to lie, but I love it. And how about we try it? And then we see if it's a good fit for us to work together. And then you always hope that it becomes something that you can tell them it's a book. It's going to be a book.
And what is that process that you have to navigate of acquiring a client and then starting to submit their work to publishers and, like you said, like that awesome moment of securing a contract?
Oh, yeah. Well, from the moment, I guess, after I offer representation and they hopefully accept and I bite my nails for 2 weeks until they do or something, we will brainstorm. Usually I'll have come up with a list of editors that I think would be a really good fit for the project. And then I kind of use my client's pitch. And if it's a really good one, I'll slot it in and then, alter it with my own pitch. But then it just becomes pitching editors. And I tend to do that through email. Most people, occasionally it will be during a lunch, so sometimes I think once during a boozy brunch, I did pitch a friend who's also an editor. And I said, hey, like, I now represent this amazing illustrator. And then I showed her the thing. She's like, I love this person. I remember in that case, she said, let's figure something out. And she told me about an auction that she was hoping to win for a book. And then in the end, she did win the auction. And my client wound up illustrating the cover of that book, which won an award. And I got really excited because in that case, she's Latina. Like the agents everybody who touched it was like a BIPOC woman. It was exciting.
Perfection.
Yeah.
Well, that's also what you just said reminded me of, going out to lunch and the whining and dining of networking in that way. But I think that and we talked a lot about this in other episodes, and I've had a lot of these conversations with friends, is there's a lot of old school networking that is more of this like old boys club. And it's very disheartening. It's very frustrating. And a lot of the wheeling and dealing, especially of like big financial deals and, so on and so forth, happens at these cigar bars and in the sauna at whatever fancy gym and all of these fucked up ways. And so it becomes like, how might we as women and then as different, checking of different boxes of different groups, how might we reinvent that in a way that has heart and soul?
Yeah. And it's so funny. I'm glad you brought that up because and I feel like I've been off social media, so much of it these days, social media and all that stuff. But I saw the George Lopez commentary that he got backlash for, where he was sitting with another Latina comedian who was also successful. And they were talking about, all right, do you have, I guess, an obligation to uplift the people coming behind you? George Lopez said no. He does not agree. He's like, you got to look out for number one. And of course, and the other comedian, I feel bad, I don't remember his name, but he said, no, like, I feel that I've made it. I want to help other people. So I completely agree with the second guy, not George Lopez, because it just doesn't do any good. There are some people, thankfully not as many, where they want to be the one, right? And the way the industry can sometimes pit you against each other, like they're upholding you as the one and anybody else's competition, which is foolish. Like, I just don't believe that. So I definitely like to have conversations. I definitely, especially when people reach out to me, I also participate in a few mentorship programs, like through People of Color in Publishing and Unlock Her Potential, which one of my clients had started for women of color. So it's really trying to spread out knowledge, and also, going to different schools, like especially where in the Bronx, where you talk about this is how you become an agent and this is what I do and you can do it too. So it's really getting the word out there and answering as many questions as possible.
Any thoughts on the current state of diversity in publishing and how it's evolved over the years?
Yeah, it's improved. It needs much more improvement. Right. So, and as we know, right, it's not a new conversation by any stretch. I mean, even in the 90s, what was it called? It wasn't called diversity, it was called multiculturalism. And then it went away for a while. And then I remember when I was working on the other side, so like Penguin and Random House, now they're the same. But yeah, I remember not realizing there was a problem, actually, because you're just swimming in the same water, right? Yeah, there are not many people like you, but I mean, I went to prep school where I was one of the few. You get used to it. So in my MFA program, a person of color asked me, he said, "Oh, when you write your stories, are you putting like Puerto Rican characters as the protagonist?" And I was like, "No, I was not," because I just said, well, that's not marketable. But what's interesting is nobody told me that. Nobody told me that it wasn't marketable, but there's something, I mean, there's clearly an implication of it. And the way that especially before, and we still, the way people would talk about people who write in those categories or they get pigeonholed and all of that sort of thing. So things have shifted, right? With especially we did diverse books, which became such a big thing. I think in 2014 it started. And now we have that wave where it became, oh my gosh, people all of a sudden, I guess, realize we want like, diverse creators, whether they're BIPOC, queer.
What's the representation of it?
Right, exactly. Right. So we started to bring people in that way. But the other side of the conversation that was being neglected is, and people didn't want to look at it when you would bring it up, is, hey, we need more of those marginalized voices working in publishing. Not just editors, agents, marketing, all of the things. Otherwise, this is going to be a cool trend that's going to go away because it's the same people in the same rooms making the same decisions. So it's improving. I still occasionally, when I'm submitting a project, like let's say I think once it was like a Puerto Rican magical realism thing. And an editor said, oh, they did essentially say, we have another on our list. And I was like, okay, well, in my head, I'm like, well, maybe it's the same story. It was not the same story. It was like it was like a totally different genre. I'm like, so again, we've moved a little, like we're sort of stepped that. So now they'll maybe take 2 or 3. But there's still a fear there. Again, also with the genres, it's opened up a bit more in terms of the kinds of stories, because if you're Latina, then it's going to be before, especially like, oh, what is it, an immigration narrative, or if you're Black, it's going to be a slavery narrative. And those stories, of course, are important, but we want to see each other in different things. Like, right, that's what we're seeing, right? Black joy and all of these wonderful stories where, you could be Black, you could be Native, and you're like fighting monsters and leave it there. Let's have some fun. Yeah.
Definitely. Is there a particularly memorable moment of your or experience in your career so far and that you'd like to share?
I will say a recent one that's been very memorable is she's a young woman of color. And there was a story that it was adult literary fiction. And I don't tend to I love beautiful writing, but adult literary is a whole other world. But I loved the writing so much. I said, okay, let's do it. And she took a chance on me as well. That was about 7 years ago. And usually, sometimes you go out with a thing and if over time it doesn't work, you let it go. She didn't quite want to let it go. And there were different ways to approach it, but I believed in it so much and she believed in it so much. And of course, this doesn't happen often, but we did get an offer for it by the end of last year. And it was amazing. And again, 7 years was the longest stretch of time for a submission. But all I was able to do was call her and say, it's going to be a book, right? It's going to be a thing. And that was man, Yeah. So, and it makes me laugh too, because people will ask, how long does it take for a book to get accepted? I'm like, well, so far for me, a day has been the shortest amount of time for an offer, or 7 years. Between 1 day and 7 years, you can expect your book to be offered on.
Incredible. Incredible. Oh, man, that's fantastic. And what would you like to see in the future for the publishing industry and for yourself in your career?
Just to keep things going, I know that so far, diversity, and they keep shifting the language. Now they're saying, let's talk more about inclusivity, whatever you want to call it. I just want it to continue to grow, right? It's still evolving. And one person did ask me, she was a white, lovely lady. But she says, I think we're pretty good, right? Like, we're set. I'm like, I don't expect to see the fruition of this even in my lifetime. Like, this is still beginning, early days. So I think right now, for me at least, the directive is to, yes, of course, bring in those writers, illustrators, but especially the people who work in publishing, because otherwise we're screwed. Like, we're just going to be screwed in the end if we don't bring those people in. But also, if you've seen the HarperCollins strike, somehow, and again, I have no say in this, but I saw that they finally did raise the starting salaries. Macmillan was shamed into it in a Publishers Weekly article. So they raised it because they were saying, oh, Macmillan has the lowest starting salary. And then they went, well, okay. A couple weeks later, they just changed it. So please make things affordable for people so you can not only recruit talent, a big issue is retention. So it's just, I want to continue to mentor and hopefully find other people to do that too. Again, I don't want to be selfish, but I do get so sad when people leave. I'm like, I hear you. You have to take care of yourself. But it's just, we've lost a valuable voice in this industry. So I just hope it continues to, even if it's baby step by baby step, just to keep that momentum going.
Before we wrap up, I do ask everyone 2 questions, and you listen to the show, which I appreciate. So I got to lay it on you. What is the worst and the best pieces of advice they've ever gotten?
Okay. So I would say the worst, and it's kind of a general catch-all, it's to do the thing that's always been done just because it's always been done that way, right? And that can apply in so many ways. But for me in particular, I had this mentor, and he's still with me, and he said he was wrong now. So I'm really glad that happened, because I rub it in his face. I'm like, you thought I was going to be wrong. So when I was trying to move from publishing, so Random House, to agenting, and there are various ways you can get paid, but generally commission is the primary way. But I was leaving a salary, which was not substantial, but it was a salary, consistency, to no salary. And I, for a long time, actually wound up having to work at a restaurant. I was in the basement, like taking orders, and then not sleeping. And then in the middle, like trying to, build my business. But in his view, because he worked at a really established agency, he's like, no, that's not the way you do things. You have to start out as an assistant. Hey, I tried. Nobody wanted me. I was considered old at 27, 28, whatever, but that's fine. So nobody wanted me, except these people took a chance on me at the agency. They said, come on board. We'll pay you commission. We'll teach you everything that we know. So he said, that's just not how you do it. Don't do it. They don't care about you. They don't support you if they don't pay you the old school way. But, there are other ways of getting your foot in the door sometimes. And if it makes sense and you can do it, don't be afraid to take that risk. So, but he says now, he's like, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I tell everybody. I'm like, good.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. And then the best advice, and that's another hard one, but I think I heard it literally on a podcast yesterday, and I just keep hearing this. It's kind of like, you are the sum total of the 5 people you hang out most with, right? So, and I always tell people community is critical. So who are you around, right? Are they uplifting you? Are they also on a trajectory that's similar to yours? You don't have to be doing the same thing, but do you feel motivated, right? You need that around you, because life is tough. And if you're going to have everybody around you being a naysayer, it's just not going to work out well for you.
And I lied. I've got one more question.
Oh, okay.
Now you've opened up this can of worms. As an agent, I mean, like you said, you are working on commission. And so have you looked at yourself, I know you just said it, but have you always looked at yourself as a business and as an entrepreneur? Is that the lens and the, hat that literary agents put on, or is it separate from that?
It's kind of funny. I always treated it as me working. I mean, it wasn't 9 to 5, but it felt like I was still an employee. I mean, they didn't treat it
24/7.
24, exactly. If I'm a 24/7 employee, and I think it was only a couple of years ago when my accountant, I think I was setting something up, and I think it was like an IRA. I'm like, I should have one of those because, you just don't get one unless you were working at a place. No, do not. So I think they were asking me, who's your employer? And I was like, oh, my agency, Galton Zacher. But I was wrong. I'm self-employed. So I'm like, oh, that's right. Okay, so I guess I am my own boss when you think about it. So it really took me a few years to shift into that. And I'm also branching into creativity coaching, which is something I've always done because it's something like, since I can't take on everybody as a client in perpetuity, I just like to help where I can. So that's, yeah. So these days, yes, more of an entrepreneur, but even a few years ago, I never would have thought I was an entrepreneur.
Totally.
No.
Well, I mean, to really come full circle to, the theme essentially of this and having diversity in these spaces that it has not been historically. I think that business and entrepreneurship is definitely something that has become, in my opinion, very whitewashed, at least through like what I've been seeing and what I've been experiencing. And I know just from the startup perspective, from the venture capital perspective, I mean, from a funding perspective, it's laughable, the funding that goes to any sort of marginalized groups. Like it may as well be non-existent. And so it's just interesting to think about it from that perspective, as well as you're talking about diversifying this specific area or specific industry of publishing. Like that takes not only getting the foot in the door of being publishers and agents and being involved in the literary world, but also all of the skills, the tools, the knowledge, to your point, of being your own boss, of being entrepreneurial, of how to, everything from setting up an LLC or an S Corp or a C Corp, so on and so forth. Like all of those tools have been hidden for so long and have been kept in the hands of the more like white supremacist world that we live in.
I mean, that is such a good point. Yes, because I was forming an LLC, and then I'm like, how do I do? Like, I had to listen to a lot of podcasts. And there was another person in my family, like nobody has their own business, right? And she was trying to figure out how to do her LLC. And now that I know a little, I was like, I can help you to this extent, even though it's a bigger question. But yeah, and then I'm finding out, I'm like, there's a small business development center. Like, that's a thing. So I had no idea. Like, there's so much I just don't know. And I'm learning every day.
Totally. What's becoming more and more evident is that it really doesn't matter what the industry is in any capacity. There's similar pillars to all of them. And at the community events that we've been hosting, it's been so cool to see the skill sharing that happens. And a lot of folks don't fit in. I mean, even yourself, like, yeah, you can, slap your name tag on as an agent, but you also have all of these other skills. And so identifying as this multi-hyphenate human being where you're an agent and and it keeps going. Like there's so many different identities that people hide depending on the social situation. And at the events, it's been really wild because then people are coming together and they're saying, my full-time job is I work in TV production, but I'm also, a touring musician, and I also am an editor, and I also shoot video and then by the end of the night, you could walk out of an event and you've got someone who's going to do all the marketing for you and all the PR and all the branding, and you're ready to go.
Yeah. That's also a good point because, right, we're kind of taught you can be one thing and that's the thing. And it's taken me a long time to break out of that and to go, you could be, and actually it's just wise to be many things these days anyway, to be flexible and all of that. But yeah, being one thing is, I mean, gone are the days, right, where you worked at a place for 30, 40 years and you retired with your gold pen or whatever it is.
Right.
The pension. I've heard those were good old days. I don't know.
Right. But the pension might be nice, but you can keep the pen. No.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, well, Linda, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. I really appreciate it. And I Can't wait to share this.
Oh, thank you.
So roll another one, your boy ain't done. Light another Uzi, load the lyrical Uzi and get you some.
Thank you for listening to The Cost of the Status Quo and learning the wisdom, stories, and ideas that will have you feeling inspired and ready to take on the world. If you've enjoyed this, please remember to share, rate, and review. It means the world to me and the team putting it all together. If you're looking for more information, you can find us at costofthestatusquo.com or on Instagram at costofthestatusquo. If you've got any questions or curiosity about me, you can find me at lindseylerner.com. That's LindseyLerner.com or on Instagram at Lindsey Lerner. Thanks again for listening. Hope you have an awesome day.